Hello, I'm Earl Wyanberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Lion Knights. Tonight we begin the reading of And Joined the Circus. The monster under the bed regarded the teddy bear in the dusty corner and said, "You've fallen down on the job, man. Still," he conceded, "I guess this is kind of out of your league." He picked the toy up carefully in a clawed hand and reached out from under the bed, waving it. "Hey, Mateo," he said, "look who I found." The little boy's hand reached down and took it. Good. Any little bit of comfort he could give. "Thanks," the child whispered. Then, "Gus, if he doesn't come tonight, will you come back tomorrow night?" "Sure thing," Gus promised. "We're getting him out of your life." There was a little sigh in which Gus could almost hear a smile. "Gus," Mateo asked, "could I look at you again?" The idea was a surprise attack, and of course to avoid notice from Mateo's family, but it was early in the evening still, so Gus again answered, "Sure thing," swung out from under the bed, and stood. He loomed over Mateo, 7 feet tall and built like a halfback. His hands and feet were clawed, and his knuckles had sharp little horns on them. A lion-like tail switched behind him. The head and face had started out human, lightly tanned with short sandy brown hair, but now he had a short cat-like muzzle, no longer than a human nose, but still a muzzle, cat whiskers that reached the considerable distance to his shoulders, and pointed mobile ears twitching for the sounds of approaching footsteps. He wore a karate gi, not white, but patterned in urban camo. Where arms, legs, and chest were bare, the skin was pebbled with thick, boxy scales, like alligator hide. Gus knew why he had been called out. He threw back his shoulders, bared his claws, lashed his tail, and smiled. The teeth in the smile were extraordinary, but that was all to the good. Mateo smiled in satisfaction. "I have fought goblins," Gus declaimed in his light, husky tenor, "and giant dogs, and wicked fairies, and men with swords and guns, and other critters like me." He had not always won, but it was more important that these enemies could be fought. "So don't worry about this guy." Mateo beamed. Brawn was not really going to serve Gus best here, but like the teddy bear, it made Mateo feel better. So be it. Still grinning, Gus leaned down to the boy's face, reflecting his grin, and bumped foreheads like a cat greeting. "Let's give him a surprise. I'll be right here." He clapped Mateo on the shoulder, crouched, and slid back under the bed. Time passed. Gus heard the TV on a Spanish language channel. Mateo's parents were trying to relax, hoping their little boy would not have another attack of night terrors, and that the vandal would not again break into their little corner grocery downstairs. The two woes had begun last week together, but they could not fathom a link between them. The police had taken their information but produced no results. The doctor told them night terrors just went away after a while. They were pathetically grateful when their old neighbors, the Weisskopfs, said that their son Gus had offered to stay up with the boy if that would help him sleep, and Gus's friend Doug had volunteered to guard the grocery. Both were recently returned from Iraq and points beyond with massive cases of PTSD, so the young men claimed it was no trouble to them to stay up for a night. Find a silver lining, eh? Mateo's parents did not, of course, believe Mateo's talk of the bad man who came in through the window, the closed window, and threatened to take him away to the graveyard. Gus believed Mateo, and more than believed him. Mateo had been a happy, giggling toddler when he and Doug left Chicago, only to drop off the world for 5 years. He had been a sunny, innocent little boy when they returned a few months ago. Then the terrors had started. Gus knew about terrors. They enraged him, and it made matters far worse that he suspected he had accidentally brought them on. So, when Mateo was tucked in bed, the parents safely out of the way, Gus had told Mateo he believed him because he had had to believe much stranger things. and he had shown Matteo why tonight would be different, shown him the face and limbs his parents had not seen. Matteo had been delighted, a little too delighted. There had been a lot of running around, being tossed in the air, tugging the tail, and giggling. Finally, Matteo's father had called up that he was supposed to be asleep, which was, of course, an oblique reprimand to Gus, too. The reprimand had been late in coming. It was too good to hear happy noises in place of weeping or anxious calls, or, of course, shrieks. So they settled down. Gus stumbled through some Spanish nursery rhymes from a book, while Matteo, exhausted, leaned against him and dozed off. Gus had tucked him in, then slipped under the bed, a plan he had explained to Matteo. But the boy had roused and called out, wanting to make sure Gus was there. Gus had reassured him and found the bear. More time passed. The TV muttered in the distance. Gus wondered if the harassed parents had fallen asleep in front of it. That would be good. And here he was. Gus felt him before there was any sound of voice or footstep. He'd been expecting this, and of course the creature was deliberately broadcasting his presence. Gus heard Matteo move, curling up in dread. He gave 3 soft, silent raps to the bed frame to remind the boy he had backup. "So here I am again," said a male voice. "Will I take you tonight or not? Maybe. Some night soon. Jump out the window with you. Carry you down to the graveyard. Keep you there. Forever. With the others. All the little kids I've got rotting down." Gus squirmed sinuously and took a peek. Round, gloating face, washed white as by moonlight, black suit, probably the one he was buried in. Time. The ghost was well focused on Matteo and was utterly startled when the lion man swarmed out from under the bed, rasping, "Aloysius Patrick, you are a liar!" The use of his true name nailed the ghost in place, in palpability, long enough for Gus to seize the thing's throat with one hand and pull its right hand behind its back with the other. It had no weight and no strength. "Aloysius Patrick Feeney," Gus repeated, another nail, musing. "Baptized at St. Bridget's, Southside in 1898. Your mom and dad must have hoped for so much more." The ghost struggled, grunted, squeaked. It turned cold, colder, painfully cold, trying to pull energy out of Gus as it had used fear to pull energy out of Matteo for too many nights. But Gus pulled back, felt the phantom form start to soften as he drained its chilly energy, deliberately stopped, and repeated, "Aloysius Patrick," in a regretful tone, shaking his head. The ghost stayed firm enough to be gripped. He glanced at Matteo, who was staring, wary but not terrified. "He's a liar. He couldn't take you away. He has no collection of kids in his grave. He can't even get to his grave. They buried him in consecrated ground for some reason. And he is never going to bother you again." He met the ghost's eyes and growled, "I don't use the word never lightly." To Matteo, "Research. The greatest general in the world, Sun Tzu, said victory goes to the side that knows the most. So I researched. Always research your enemy. This guy died in a shootout down the street from here back in 1928 with a handful of others. So I knew within a few guesses who he'd be, what his right name would be. Right Aloysius Patrick, alias your pal Al, alias Feeney the Mick, alias Jack Brown." Feeney hung in his hand, registering shock endlessly, as only the unembodied can. "What?" he wheezed. What am I? I don't owe you any explanations. You give me some answers, or the pain starts a little sooner. Why'd you start hassling my man Matteo here? Why now?" The ghost stared into the slitted blue eyes and gibbered, "I just cold, hungry." "I bet you've been cold and hungry since 1928. Why now?" "You'll have to snort him," said a new voice. Gus and Matteo turned and saw another cat man crouching in the now open window frame. But catmen were now firmly lodged in Mateo's brain as good news, so he had no trouble seeing past the muzzle and ears. He beamed and said, "Hi, Doug. I didn't know you were a catman." "Yep, hi, Mateo," Doug answered, unfolding himself from the window. He was an inch or so taller even than Gus, and leaner. His hair was black and his eyes Asian, discounting the slit pupils. "How'd it go?" Gus asked. "Okay," Doug waved a beer bottle. "The late Jules Adelard Gobeil and Barnabas John Kalachek, though I think Kalachek is just a shell." "Both in one bottle?" Gus asked. Doug shrugged. "Kalachek just followed Gobeil in." "They shrink down like Greathouse said?" Doug nodded. "Textbook. Watch him," he advised, pointing to Feeney. The ghost, still dangling weightlessly in Gus's grasp, was stealthily starting to fade and lose focus. "No, you don't, Aloysius Patrick," Gus told him. Feeney looked solid and as if he'd been slapped. "Enough of this," Gus growled and pulled in Feeney's energy. The ghost gave a fading squeak, blurred, and shrank down to an apple-sized patch of mist in Gus's hand. "I'll go now, too," said Doug. He unstoppered the bottle, leaned over it, and gave a sudden inhalation. At the same time, Gus clapped his hand to his mouth and sucked. Both catmen leaned over, grimacing, eyes shut, and stood silent for about 10 seconds. Mateo watched anxiously in great confusion. Was everything all right? Then Doug puffed into the beer bottle and stood. Gus, still bent over, waved his nearest hand in an urgent gimme gesture. Doug handed him the bottle. He exhaled into it and handed it back. Doug stoppered it. "Gus, Doug?" asked Mateo, some fear coming back into his face. "It's okay, buddy," Gus assured him, sitting heavily on the bed and letting the boy climb into his lap. But then he stared at nothing for some seconds. Doug sat next to him and did the same. "We're just thinking," Doug muttered to Mateo. "Give us a minute." He rolled the beer bottle between his palms and stared. When they inhaled, lives had passed before their eyes, not their own, but the ghost's. They had tried not to look. These had not been pleasant or uplifting lives. And readily enough, the memories faded like dreams on waking. But the two were trying to hold on to the very last bits, not memories of lives, but of afterlives. "If I ever get so I like that," Gus started. Doug knew that Gus had been about to say, "Kill me," but had stopped short. There was Mateo to consider. Anyway, there was no ridding the world of Gus or himself. "I will show you the error of your ways," Doug told him, brandishing a fist where Mateo could not see. "I will use words if necessary." "Thanks," Gus sighed. "Let's finish this." Doug passed him the bottle. "Is everything okay?" asked Mateo, worried by the catmen's demeanor. "Yep," said Gus, forcing a cheerful tone and sitting up straight. "Watch this." He uncorked the bottle and said, "Aloysius Patrick." In a gray flicker, the ghost sprang out of the bottle. Gus immediately stoppered it. Mateo huddled deeper into Gus's lap and glared defiantly at his tormentor, who stared back, dazed. Gus felt in the pocket of his gi. "I don't really know that you're going to hell," he told Feeney. "That's just the way I'd bet. But you can't stay here." He pulled a lighter out of his pocket and lit it. Feeney stared at the flame, bewildered, and made no move when Gus reached out and touched it to his shirt cuff. For an instant, he was a silhouette of fire, then gone. "See?" Gus told Mateo. "Gone forever." The boy gave a little grunt of satisfaction. Gus handed the bottle and lighter to Doug. "Jules Adelard," Doug called. He held the lighter ready at the mouth of the bottle as he unstoppered it. The flame flared briefly, but no figure formed. "Barnabas John." Another flare. "Now," he told Mateo, "no one will be smashing bottles and tearing open candy bars and cigarette packs in your folks' store." Mateo gave a smile, sighed, leaned back onto Gus, and fell asleep. "Holy crow," said Gus. Enviable, Doug agreed, shaking his head. If I could pick good sleep like that out of his pocket, well, it would be quite a temptation. Gus nodded, rose with the boy in his arms, and slid him under the sheets. Then he sighed, and with the sigh, melted back into his human form. He whispered a prayer for the boy's continued peace. Doug did not have such definite beliefs, but echoed the amen at the end, partly in solidarity with his friend, partly because if anyone was listening, he wanted to cast his vote. He then hopped back onto the windowsill. See you at 6. He clambered down the brownstone side, humanized as Gus had done, and re-entered the store to keep watch for the look of the thing until dawn. Upstairs, Gus did the same. Mateo's parents, the Navarros, rose at 5, not 6, so 6 found Gus and Doug at their breakfast table being stuffed with coffee and pastries. Over the pastries, Gus told them Mateo might have a story about how Gus jumped out from under the bed and caught the bad man and bawled him out and burned him up so he was gone forever. They smiled and connected this with the horsing around noises heard early in the evening. Gus did not correct them. Doug told them in vague terms about spotting, chasing, cornering, karate kicking, and threatening a couple of terrified figures. Then he took out his phone. Here they are. Mr. and Mrs. Navarro looked at the picture, a corner of their store with the dairy case on one side and a rack of salty snacks on the other. Between, cornered, cowered 2 figures in shabby old-fashioned black suits and ties. Their faces were colorless, almost unreadable. Their eyes were darknesses. If you looked carefully, you might think they were a bit translucent, especially around the feet and hands. Sorry about the poor picture quality, Doug said airily. You kicked them? Mr. Navarro asked. Well, at them. Not sure I connected, but they were unhappy about it. Do you want me to send you the pictures for the police? Send them, yes, please, said Mrs. Navarro. You threatened them? Doug nodded. They seemed pretty scared. Don't think they'll be back. But if you have trouble like that again, contact me and we'll do what we can. He glanced at Doug, who also nodded, though he was gazing thoughtfully at his friend. A few minutes later, on the steps of his parents' home, Gus asked Doug, what was with the pictures? I wanted to reassure them, said Doug. They were taking physical damage in the store, so I wanted to show them I'd taken physical measures, or near it. And yeah, they are probably wondering about ghosts, but we know those 2 won't be back. Gus was silent a moment, then asked, so what did you make of the memories? I'm trying to forget them. It's just an aftertaste. Those were not good lives to live. Neither was Feeney's, but that's no excuse. Never mind their lives, how about after? Why'd they start poltergeisting when they did? It's hazy. And, Doug added hastily, I might be making up stuff, but it was like they had a hard time focusing on anything for a long time, but then they could see this place and the neighborhood. He made a wave that included the Navarro's store. So they started hanging around, but not too close because there was a big, bad, scary thing nearby. That would be me, Gus said without pride. But here was stuff they could see and touch and be alive with, sort of. So they went for it. Smashing stuff was what they liked to do before, so they did it some more. Okay, well, Feeney was a lot like that. Focused in, found a victim, started bullying, which is what he liked to do. How about at your place? Maybe it's just the luck of the draw, but I think that in Chinatown, they're quicker to slap down misbehaving ghosts, and the ghosts know it. So no trouble. But more ghosts just on the street than I see anywhere else. And there are the animals. Starting 2 weeks ago, stray cats and dogs, endless crows, some raccoons, and even, Doug thought, a coyote roamed the streets and alleys near his home. Many were too bright-eyed or tinged with traces of magic. Mom asks me to do something about them at least once a day. I suppose, said Gus, that we could do something about it if we knew what we were doing, but we don't, not yet. So, call on Professor Rook? Yep, and together with Gus and Doug, We will call on Professor Rook next time.